Good morning, I'm ED-SKaR and I am at, once again, War Games Workshop for another game of Bolt Action, except this time we are doing something a little bit interesting. We are playing Tank War with 3rd edition Bolt Action, which doesn't exist yet. And so we've actually kind of shoehorned in some of the 2nd edition rules into 3rd edition to make it work, but it's actually even easier than we thought it was going to be, because all you do is you switch over the platoon requirements of the rifle platoon and the armoured platoon to make your armoured platoon the first thing in the list. Now, I thought that it would be a really good idea, instead of having tanks that have 1 shot each per turn, to have a tank that has 2 shots each per turn. So there'll be a separate video coming out soon where I paint up 5 M3 Lees, and my M3 Lee platoon will be here today. They get 5 anti-tank gun shots, medium anti-tank gun shots, 5 light anti-tank gun shots, and also the cupolas have machine guns as well, so I can potentially target up to 15 units with various amounts of damage. And nothing's particularly powerful, but it might just be enough. So let's head inside and see about how much damage I can cause. I should also briefly mention that I have, in fact, also brought a rifle platoon in addition to my 5 M3 Lees. As we're playing at 1500 points, I had enough spare for a little bit of infantry to come along as well. Specifically, I have a regular squad with 2 BARs, a veteran squad with 3 submachine guns, all on a half track, and then a jeep with an officer and the all-important forward air observer for that double use bonus the US get. Now, I wasn't hoping for much damage output out of these, but I just wanted a little more in the way of numbers, as 5 Lees is just 5 models, and having a little bit more stuff on the board was just something I really wanted. We also had a little reconnaissance flight over the battlefield. Unfortunately, I didn't actually play on this table, but it's very pretty. For my first game against an opponent I've somehow not played before, but has been in the group for a little while, we're playing long ways down a table, because Tank War, obviously we have bigger guns that have longer range, so we want a kind of longer range on the table to actually shoot at each other with, and so we play long ways. I'm on the right of this picture, and we just have to take the centre of the board. That's the orange token in the middle. Given the long lines of sight, especially on this particular board, I felt that I could take as much advantage of some long-range shooting, but I knew that I would have to push up onto the objective at some point, and this little building provided the only real opportunity for me to do so. I put more than half of my force seemingly scattered around with no focus, but all pointed at this building, so they could, over the course of the first couple of turns, bundle in, get up to it, and I would be in a good position to fight from there and take the objective. On the other side, my right flank, I had a couple of tanks over here to try and pretend that I was being a little less focused, try and make it look like I had a spread out front line. But this weaker side got all manner of upset when an enemy Panther had the perfect position to shoot at them all, which wasn't ideal. But my odd Lee with the fuel drum on the back, that one had the perfect position to shoot down the table edge with its medium anti-tank gun and off to the Panther with its light anti-tank gun in the turret. And this was starting to lean into the idea that I had about the M3 Lee getting those 2 shots and pointing in different targets. Now, it didn't kill anything, but it just kept shooting at these 2 things each turn, with the bonus for standing still that we get now in 3rd edition, and it was just really useful in keeping my opponent on the back foot. The mob on the left was quite a mess, but I managed to get a few shots off on the way until the Panther zipped around and immobilized my lead vehicle, which just meant that all of the others had to spread out and squeeze through between terrain and around it. But squeeze through I did, and I got onto the objective, continuously putting 2 anti-tank gun shots and a machine gun burst for every vehicle. And even all of this, I didn't actually kill anything. Not for the entire game, not one model. Funnily, this Hanomag did get pinned out. 9 pins without I hit it 9 times without killing it, and so it ran away. Even funnier than that is the officer on board took 3 or 4 pins rolled a double 6 for a foobar on their order test and fled off the board. So I technically scored 2 points, and of course the win because I held the centre of the objective. Now in just the last 2 minutes of our time slot, we didn't have enough to play a full extra turn, but I wanted to bring in the airstrike that would have been at the beginning of the next turn. And in this hypothetical alternative future, the infantry left behind by the Hanomag would have received enough pins to make them also flee, and the Panther, taking several autocannon shots into the engine deck from a Polish Spitfire pilot, would have hypothetically died and hypothetically would have been the only model I killed in the entire game. But that didn't actually happen because we didn't actually play the whole turn, we didn't count it. My second game in the desert against my usual Polish player, who I usually play against first, but this time they brought their American models, maybe because the Polish don't have particularly good access to good tanks. And we were playing table quarters. I'm starting in the bottom left of this image, fighting diagonally. Now my opponent has a lot of tank destroyers, and my bog standard front armour and thin sides means I'm feeling a little vulnerable. So I have to take advantage of cover, especially using the Lee to sneak around a corner with that kind of front side sponson gun. But also, I do just have to accept that I'm losing something. Whatever vehicle goes in first is going to get blown to bits, and then I have to push up into the ambush with the other vehicles, advance and keep the pressure on. And so I focused everything except, unfortunately, I accidentally sent my command tank by himself on the left. Everything else went to the longboard edge and hook around the right, which started surprisingly well because both of us were missing everything. That was until I managed to brew up a Sherman. I tried to sneak my half-track of infantry using the Sherman wreck as cover, but the enemy half-track came along and we had a whole heap of a scuffle where kind of confusing as to which one's which. Mine is the one with the gunner modelled on the M2, otherwise they're literally the same model kit there. And those 3 ones, those are my point-blank 2+ dice rolls for shooting that M2 at the enemy half-track. Yes, well done. My command tank on its lonesome all the way on the other side of the board had to face a Wolverine and a Stuart, but it got into that perfect hull down position behind the building and just kept shooting. One gun at each tank each turn wherever possible, or both against the same target if that was all I could see. And I did manage to blow the Wolverine up, and I pushed in on the Stuart, although it wrecked either way. My main push, however, this turned into a total nightmare of gunfire and burning hulls. My Lees could barely fit around each other, and I didn't position them very well, and then once again my lead vehicle got taken out, making things even more of a mess. But I did manage one thing that made me really happy. I managed to position one of my Lees to have the perfect 3-direction split. I'm shooting my medium anti-tank gun in the hull at the Sherman in front of me, the turret's light anti-tank gun into the Stuart, and then that dinky little cupola pointing backwards at the Jeep that I've driven past. And all I managed to do was hit one shot on that Jeep with the machine gun, or everything else missed. But it had to be pushing up. It had to be keep the pressure on. It had to be keep shooting at all of the different guns, at all of the different targets. Pins for you, and occasionally a larger explosion meant that I actually killed something. And at the end of the game, all of this carnage, 3 of my Lees down, 4 enemy tanks burning, but this is all happening in my opponent's table quarter. So all of my surviving models are scoring points because that was the mission, get into the enemy's deployment zone, and overall that means I did win, but it was so tough. The final game with 2 wins now, and I'm up on the top table against one of our group's best players. Our game is back on the same board as my first game, but at least I'm fighting the other way, so that's interesting. And what we need to do is drive down the long end of the board and off of the far table edge. And that is a tough drive, even with the extended 8 turns that we should have had. As my first two opponents were fairly careful with advancing and staying in cover and doing some long-range shooting, I was actually expecting my opponent here to play very aggressively, given the mission, and so I was looking at all of the places on the board where I expected we'd meet each other, and importantly, where do I need to block my opponent's advance? I didn't come up with any good answers for that, and so my deployment was mediocre, which meant I really had to sort myself out and advance into some good spots quickly. My opponent pushed down the long sightline on my left flank with a KV and Su-85, along with some little tank riders that decided that one pin was enough to make them flee off of the board edge. I had a pair of Lees in a blocking position right in front of them, and every turn an 80 shot at each enemy tank and a machine gun shot at the infantry if they could see them. And that solidly prevented them from advancing and reaching my board edge, but it also meant that I hadn't moved from my defensive position either. The centre of the board was my most mobile area. The half-track screamed off onto the right, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the fuel tank Lee sitting in the middle, shooting at all different directions, was awesome, but didn't really kill very much. I dismounted the BAR squad here on the way past, which was a terrible idea, as the enemy had a quad heavy machine gun truck, which is to infantry as fire is to things that are destroyed by fire, which just leaves the right. And here from my opponent's point of view, their Su-100 took out one of my Lees, and the other one just advanced and advanced and advanced. Aggressive, no cover, keep the pressure on. 2 anti-tank gun shots per turn and the machine gun at the infantry, and I managed to get a pin, just one pin after all of that, just one pin on the Su-100, which meant that it failed its order test, and then it failed its order test again, and it, much to my opponent's annoyance, it reversed off of the battlefield. And along with this Lee was my half-track, but they didn't actually get far enough forward to score any points. You have to get all the way to the board edge. And they were there in a position to take out the enemy infantry squad here, but they just didn't score any points. And so, between me and my opponent, we scored a grand total of no points. A perfect 0 draw. Which means that the overall day's score came down to the points we'd scored in the other games, as we both had 2 wins and then the draw between us. My first game hadn't scored that much at all, and neither had my third, obviously, and so it all came down to that carnage of the training exercise of the Yanks versus Yanks in my second game. Now apparently that was enough, and by 4 points I came out with first place in this tournament. Am I becoming a good player? Is the M3 Lee a broken, overpowered tank? Was I just lucky? Perhaps all 3. Overall, I think the Lee did perform fairly well, but it just wasn't anywhere near as deadly as I had been hoping for. I spent a lot more time bullying enemy tanks into letting me advance than actually destroying any enemy tanks. All 3 of my opponents were good fun to play against, and I do hope they say the same for me. If you have the opportunity to attend a local event of any game, I encourage you give it a try. Go and lose a few games and have some fun and meet people who like the same game and setting as you, even if it's not bolt action. But for now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.